When I was 12, YouTube introduced me to tiny clay artwork. Now, 10 years later, and much to the dismay of my parents, I've managed to turn it into my job. So I figured I'd take a trip down memory lane and recreate some of my oldest food sculptures. This turkey sandwich is the first clay charm I've made that I actually have proof of. In reality, it's actually the second thing I've made. The first was a little pink panther that burned to a crisp in the oven because I didn't even bother to read the baking instructions. But I assure you it looked great. Anyways, for the new version, I started by making the most realistic piece of bread that I could. And I kid you not, I spent 40 minutes just adding the texture because I'm crazy. And after all of that, there was no way you could make me do it a second time, so I just went ahead and made a mold of this piece. Once the mold was cured, I used it to make two perfectly textured pieces of bread. I then sliced them diagonally, textured them on the inside of those cuts, and then added a thin strip of clay on the outside to make the crust. After, I went ahead and put the bread in the oven to pre-bake so I don't have to worry about smushing any of that texture. In the meantime, I got to work on the other components. I started with the lettuce, and I'm gonna be honest, I would explain what I'm doing, but I have no clue. I was just putting different colors together and hoping it would work, and it sort of did. So that's the lettuce. And then these little red bits are meant to be the tomatoes, and I kind of wanted to go all out and make a detailed tomato cane just to prove to myself that my skills have improved. But to be honest, that's a lot of work that tomatoes don't deserve. They are the worst fruit, vegetable known to mankind. And I would never put one in a real sandwich, so it's kind of me to even include them. Plus, they're barely gonna show, and these charms take so many hours to make that I refuse to spend any extra time doing that. To make the turkey, I used a very pale pinkish beige color and dusted the outside with chalk pastels. Then I sliced it up, and that's our deli meat. After the bread was baked solid, I started assembling the sandwich using liquid clay to make sure everything sticks together. The turkey slices looked way too thick, so I ended up carefully dividing them into thinner appearing pieces with my needle tool. And then I put both pieces in the oven to bake completely. After cooling, I coated parts of the sandwich with glaze. I didn't use this stuff back in the day, but it really helps bring everything to life. Next, I wanted to remake this hot dog with its perfect mustard drizzle. I rolled out some dough-colored clay and used rubbing alcohol to remove any dust. Then I brushed it with chalk pastels till it looked nice and toasty. A lot of my first charms are missing eye pins because I didn't know how to secure them to the clay. So to make sure this one stays in place, I'm bending it with pliers before sticking it into the hot dog bun. After that, I made a V-shaped cut nearly halfway through the clay and used a needle tool to give the inside of the bread a soft and crumbly texture. Now to make the hot dog, I mixed red, orange, brown, and translucent clay. I rolled some of this out to make a sausage, and then I used liquid clay to make sure it sticks to the bun. To make sure this mustard looks real and doesn't crack, I added TLS to some yellow clay until I got this watery yellow liquid. I then zigzagged it onto the hot dog. I baked the whole piece for half an hour and then glazed it so it looks very rubbery and appetizing. Next up is this broken M&M's ice cream cookie sandwich. Not only are the M&M's not the same size, but they're also smushed on top. I'm starting by making the M&Ms first so that they have time to bake. With a long blade, I'm cutting all the colors at the same time so that the pieces of candy are as close to the same size as I can get them. And then to really test my vision, I tediously shaped each tiny M&M. Once I made what seemed like enough, I pre-baked them till they were solid. This way they can retain their shape while combined with the fake cookie dough. I even added a few extra pieces on top just to make sure they're very visible. Now to create texture, I'm using a ball of crumpled up aluminum foil, which I'm rolling all over the top of the cookies. And then with a needle tool, I gave each one a few cracks and crevices right before I shaded the edges with orangey brown chalk pastels. I baked the cookies before moving on to the next step. Once they had cooled, I took some vanilla colored clay and sandwiched it in between the two cookies. I baked the whole thing one more time, then glazed the M&Ms. This cheeseburger was one of my better and more intricate pieces back in the day. To make the new one, I started by using dough-colored clay for the hamburger buns. I added texture and shading, then stuck them in the oven to pre-bake. For the burger, I just started by mixing a bunch of different shades of brown together, but like, not all the way. I don't know why I did this. It didn't really do anything. And I could have totally used one color, but it made sense to me at the time. To texture, I used a ball of crumpled up aluminum foil and rolled it all over the clay till it looked wrinkly. I decided to be extra and pre-bake the patty as well. Get used to the pre-baking, I do it way more than I need to. But anyways, while I wait for the patty to bake, I'm recycling the extra lettuce and tomatoes from the turkey sandwich and adding them to the bottom bun. After the patty was out of the oven, I coated the outside with watered down black paint. Then I added it on top of the lettuce and those red things. I cut a square of yellow clay for the cheese and then I layered that on top and followed it with the top bun. The next thing I'm going to recreate is this slice of pizza with exactly 12 shreds of cheese. With my pasta machine, I'm rolling out some pale clay and cutting out a circle. Then I placed a rope of clay around the edge and blended the two pieces together. With aluminum foil and a hard bristled brush, I textured the top and sides of the crust. Then I placed the clay on top of a piece of wrinkled foil so that the bottom can get textured as well. I gave the crust some color with shaved down chalk pastels. Then I cut out a triangle and used my needle tool to give the slice some texture right before I put it in the oven to bake for 10 minutes. While I was waiting for the crust to bake, I made the sauce and cheese by mixing clay and TLS. I also mixed some Fimo Deco Gel with chalk pastels, and I'm going to use this to make the pizza look nice and greasy. Once the crust was ready, I started layering the three mixtures on top and slightly down the edge of the crust. I then baked the whole thing and used gloss glaze over the top to make sure the cheese looks super oily. I clearly had an obsession with M&M foods, but this was one of my better pieces at the time, and I also believe this was the first time I ever tried making frosting. For the current version, I started by cutting out circles of vanilla-colored clay and stacking them. I gave each stack a ton of color on both sides, then I rolled a thinner sheet of chocolate-colored clay and cut out a circle. With all 3 pieces, I made a sandwich, then used my craft blade to cut out a slice. And to make the cake layers look super fluffy, I'm just drawing small circles with my needle tool. I then mixed up some white frosting and generously coated the outside of the cake slice. I still had some extra tiny M&Ms left over from the cookies I made earlier, and I carefully sprinkled them on top of the frosting. I also made some fake chocolate frosting and layered that over the middle layer so it looks a bit more real. Finally, I glazed the frosting after the whole piece had finished baking. So these are 2 lollipops. I don't really have anything to say about these. I don't really like them now. I didn't really like them back then either. They're very meh. I'm starting with cutting a toothpick right down the middle and painting the 2 pieces white with some acrylic paint. While I leave the paint to dry, I'm starting on the candy portion. I figured the pastel colors looked too unrealistic, so I went with red and dark blue instead. And I'm mixing each one of those colors with translucent clay. Then I rolled each color out, cut out a circle, and baked them fully. Once they had cooled, I used a hand drill to drill a hole in each one. Then I glued the sticks in the holes and made the lollipops glossy. Back when I made the first lollipops, I used translucent clay to make the wrappers. Not only did this make it difficult to see the lollipops inside, but the thin clay is fragile and a corner ended up breaking off. So for the new version, I'm using clear vinyl instead, and I'm cutting out 2 pieces for each charm. I used a mini hair straightener to melt and bind the edges together, and then I cut off any excess vinyl. Okay, that's all I got.